You have 5 minutes to sign over your hotel empire, Grain. Or I make the call to have you involuntarily committed for a mental breakdown. My father didn't even blink as he threatened to lock me away just to steal my $580 million company. He thought he was holding a gun to my head. He did not realize I was the one holding the bullets. I waited for him to finish his wine, the last expensive thing he would ever drink, and set my fork down with a loud clink. You are mistaken, Dad. I didn't come here to negotiate a surrender. I came to serve an eviction notice. I reached under my chair, pulled out the heavy legal binder I had been hiding, and slammed it onto the table between us. 4 hours earlier, the only thing on my mind was the ticker running across the bottom of the news screen in my office. Grain's Hospitality Group, valued at $580 million. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Boston headquarters, looking down at the city that finally knew my name. I am 29 years old, and I spent the last 5 years clawing my way up from nothing to build this view. Then my phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. It was not a congratulatory call. It was a text from Edward. Family dinner, 7 p.m. Urgent. Don't be late. No hello. No proud of you. Just a command. As if I were still the scared 24-year-old girl he had thrown out of the house for loving the wrong man. My stomach tightened. A phantom reflex from a time when his disapproval could physically crush me. 5 years ago, Edward had locked the iron gates of the estate in my face. He called my husband, Julian, a parasitic draftsman, and told me that if I married a penniless architect, I was dead to the Ashford legacy. He cut off my access to the family trust, my contacts, even my health insurance. He wanted us to starve so I would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. He did not know that hunger is a hell of a motivator. Julian and I lived on instant noodles and panic for 2 years. We slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled like damp plaster, while we renovated our first boutique hotel with our own hands. Edward thought he was breaking me. He was actually forging me into something he could not control. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Why go? I didn't need him. I certainly didn't need his urgent drama, but then I remembered the notification from my encrypted messaging app. I opened the secure chat with Lucas, my younger brother. He was the only one still trapped in the mansion, playing the role of the obedient son while secretly feeding me intel. 2 days ago, he had sent a photo of a crumpled document he had fished out of Edward's library trash can. It was a final notice of default from a private equity firm that specialized in high-risk bridge loans. Basically, legalized loan sharks for the desperate elite. I zoomed in on the numbers. The debt wasn't just a mortgage payment. It was $28 million in toxic loans, personally guaranteed by Edward, due in full within 48 hours. The realization hit me like a shot of adrenaline. My father wasn't calling me for a reunion. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because he was drowning, and he had seen my valuation on the news. He saw me as a life raft. He thought he was inviting a daughter to dinner to bully her into a bailout. He didn't realize who was actually coming to the table. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call my therapist. I called my lead counsel. Buy it, I told him. Buy the debt shell company holding the note. Pay whatever premium they want. Just get the paper in my name before 6 p.m. When I walked out of my office and into the elevator, I checked my reflection in the chrome doors. The scared girl was gone. Tonight, I wasn't going home to visit my father. I was going to visit my debtor. The dining room felt less like a place for a family meal and more like a crypt where affection went to die. My mother, Constance, sat to my right, twisting her linen napkin until her knuckles turned white. She would not look at me. Lucas sat opposite, staring intently at the floral pattern on the fine china. His silence a loud, clear signal. He knew what was coming. Edward sat at the head of the table. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how I'd been for the last 5 years. He just reached for the decanter and poured himself a glass of a vintage Bordeaux that retails for $3,000 a bottle. Money he definitely didn't have. As he tipped the bottle, I saw it, a microscopic tremor in his hand. The crystal neck rattled against the glass rim. He set the bottle down too hard to mask it. He wasn't calm. He was terrified. I saw the news, he said, slicing his steak with unnecessary violence. Beginner's luck is a dangerous drug, Grain. It makes amateur girls think they are actually businesswomen. He took a long sip of wine, his eyes drilling into mine. And how is the draftsman? Still playing with his crayons while you do the heavy lifting? He meant Julian. He always called Julian the draftsman, spitting the word like it was a slur, refusing to acknowledge him as an architect or a husband. 5 years ago, those words would have made me shrink into my chair. I would have stammered, tried to defend us, tried to beg for his respect. Tonight, I just watched him. I watched the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the chill in the room. I watched the way his eyes darted involuntarily to the grandfather clock against the wall, measuring the time he had left. He wasn't a king holding court. He was a cornered animal baring its teeth because it had no other defense. I didn't feel anger. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a pathologist looking at a tumor. I was just waiting to make the cut. "We need to protect the family assets," he said, his voice dropping to a register that feigned concern. "I have been speaking with specialists. You are obviously under a tremendous amount of strain. It is making you erratic. Unstable." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a thick manila envelope across the mahogany table. It stopped inches from my plate. I opened the folder. The top document was a draft petition for emergency conservatorship. Beneath it were 3 psychiatric evaluations detailing my severe nervous breakdown, my paranoia, and my inability to manage complex finances. All signed, sealed, and ready to be filed with the probate court, the moment I refused to cooperate. I glanced at the signature on the top evaluation. Dr. Eris Vance, a man I hadn't seen since I was 12 years old. "Vance signed this?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "He hasn't treated me in decades. He would lose his medical license for perjury before the ink dried on this page." Edward smiled, a cruel, thin stretching of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Vance isn't worried about his license, Grain. He is worried about the $200,000 in gambling debts I covered for him in Atlantic City last winter. He writes exactly what I tell him to write." The realization hit me with the weight of a stone. He wasn't just a bully. He was a puppet master who collected people's sins and used them as leashes. He truly believed he could lock me away in a facility and steal my life just because he held a marker on a degenerate gambler. He thought this was his checkmate. He leaned forward, the smell of wine and arrogance rolling off him. "You sign the transfer of control to me voluntarily, or Dr. Vance files these in the morning. Your stock tanks, your investors flee, and I take over anyway to save you. It is your choice." I looked at the manila envelope, then up at him. He looked triumphant, a man who had just played an ace. He expected me to crumble. He expected the old Graina to beg him not to ruin her reputation. But I just had one question left. A loose thread I needed to cut before I tightened the noose. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not the business. Not the money. Why, Julian? He is a brilliant architect. He treats me like gold. Why did you hate him enough to try to starve us?" Edward chuckled, the sound wet and ugly. He took another sip of wine, relaxed now that he thought he had won. "Hate him? I don't hate him, Grain. I don't think about him at all. He was just a necessary casualty." He leaned back, spreading his hands. "You needed to learn that you couldn't survive without me. So, I made a few calls. Boston is a small town for people with my influence. I told the top 5 firms that if they hired your husband, Ashford Financial would pull every construction loan we held with them." He smiled, remembering it like a fond memory. "I heard you two were living in a basement in Southie for a while. Eating ramen. Wearing second-hand coats. I admit. I checked your credit reports occasionally. Just to see how close you were to breaking. I wasn't being cruel, sweetheart. I was being a father. I had to let you hit rock bottom so you would remember who holds the ladder." There it was. The confession. He didn't just watch us struggle. He engineered it. Every night I cried myself to sleep worrying about rent. Every time Julian came home defeated from another rejected interview. Every meal we skipped. Edward had orchestrated it all from this dining room table. He viewed our poverty as his parenting strategy. The last microscopic grain of guilt I felt for what I was about to do evaporated. I reached out and slid the envelope with the fake psychiatric evaluations back across the table. It hit his wine glass with a sharp tink. "You love leverage, Dad," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "So let us talk about yours." "What are you doing?" he snapped, his smile faltering. "You sign those papers, or Vance files in the morning. Dr. Vance can file whatever he wants. It won't matter. Because you are not negotiating with a CEO anymore." I opened the heavy legal binder I had placed on the table. Inside wasn't a merger agreement. It was a stack of transfer documents stamped with the seal of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I turned the binder around so he could read the cover page. "You took out a $28 million bridge loan 6 months ago from a private equity firm called Cerberus Capital. High interest, short term, backed by your personal guarantee, and secured by 51% of your voting shares in Ashford Financial." Edward's face went gray. "That is confidential." "How do you know that?" "Cerberus Capital was a shell company," I interrupted. "They were looking to offload their high-risk bad debt last week. They thought you were going to default, so they sold the note for pennies on the dollar." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I bought the note, Dad. I own the shell company. I own the debt. And most importantly, I own the default clause." He stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. The realization washed over him in a slow, terrifying wave. He wasn't sitting across from a daughter he could bully with fake doctors. He was sitting across from his sole creditor. "I am calling the loan," I said. "Full repayment. $28 million. Due immediately." Edward's face darkened to a sickly purple, a vein hammering at his temple. He shot up so fast his knees slammed the table, silverware jumping, and his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the floor. "This is fraud," he bellowed, spit snapping from his mouth. "You can't do this. I'll tear it up." He lunged for the binder. Lucas sprang up, his chair screeching. "Dad, stop." Edward shoved him hard. My brother stumbled into the sideboard, knocking a crystal decanter to the parquet. It exploded into glittering shards. "Sit down, you coward!" Edward roared, eyes wild as he clawed at the binder's pages, ready to rip my win into confetti. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over a pre-drafted message to my lead counsel, one word. Execute. I watched my father wrestle the heavy binding, breathing ragged, dignity gone, like a man fighting a ghost. Then I hit send. "Go ahead," I said, my voice slicing through his panting. "Tear it up. Burn it. Eat it if you want." Edward froze, pages crumpled in his fists. He looked up at me, chest heaving. "It doesn't matter," I said, locking my screen and setting the phone down. "That binder is a courtesy copy. My legal team was waiting for my signal. They just electronically filed the confession of judgment with the Suffolk County Clerk. It's on the docket now." I tapped the table once. "Public record, Dad. The debt is called. The default is registered. The clock already ran out." He let the binder drop with a heavy thud. "You can't. I have assets. I have the house. The house takes time to foreclose," I corrected. "I didn't want the house. I wanted speed." I rose, smoothing my dress as if we were discussing seating arrangements, not a collapse. "That's why I reviewed the collateral agreement you signed with Cerberus. To get that bridge loan, you pledged your controlling stake in Ashford Financial as security." I stepped around the table until I was directly in front of him. He smelled like sour wine and fear. Under UCC Article 9, a secured creditor can seize voting rights immediately upon default to protect the asset. I leaned closer. "I'm the creditor." My voice dropped to a whisper. "I just exercised that right. I own your shares, Edward. I control the board. I control the building. I control you." His phone started buzzing in his pocket. Then mine. Then Lucas's an ugly little chorus of alerts announcing the end. "That's probably the board secretary," I said calmly. "They've been notified of the change in control." I held his gaze. "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad. You've just been fired from your own company." Edward stared at his screen as if it were written in a language he'd never learned. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like gravity stole it. He sagged into his chair with a sound like air rushing out of a punctured tire. For years, decades, he'd been a giant in my life. The man who controlled the weather in our house. Now he looked small in his expensive suit. A mean old man who borrowed too much to buy affection he never earned. He turned to my mother. "Constance," he rasped. Tell her this is insanity." My mother didn't move. Normally she'd jump in, soften, soothe, explain away his rage. Tonight she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. Eyes wide with terror and something else. Awe. You could see the math happening in her head. The realization that the daughter she'd pitied had just taken the crown off the king without breaking a sweat. She took a sip of water. Said nothing. That silence was louder than his screaming. It was the sound of loyalty shifting. I looked at Lucas. He lifted the wine glass he hadn't touched all night and took a long, slow drink. Then he set it down and met my eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched, microscopic, but unmistakable. "A salute." "You have 30 days, I said, letting the words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. 30 days to vacate the CEO suite at the Prudential Tower. I've already instructed building security to revoke your access pass effective midnight tonight. Tomorrow you can go in with an escort to collect personal effects. Photos, plants. Leave the files." Edward made a strangled sound. "I built that office. And you leveraged it to cover your bad bets," I replied. "Now it's mine. My team audits the books on Monday. If I find more misappropriated funds, I won't just fire you, Edward." I held the pause like a blade. "I will prosecute you." I didn't call him Dad. I couldn't. That man was gone. I picked up my purse. I expected to feel heavy, crushed under the enormity of what I'd done. Instead, I felt light, almost weightless, like the air had finally returned to my lungs. "Grain," my mother whispered. "Where are you going?" "Home," I said. "To my husband." I walked out, heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm across the parquet. Behind me, a chair scraped. "You ungrateful witch," Edward screamed, raw, broken, the last gasp of a tyrant out of ammunition. "I made you. You're nothing without me." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I kept walking past portraits of ancestors who would have hated me, through the museum quiet foyer, and out the heavy oak front door. The night air hit my face cold, sharp, clean. I breathed in like the oxygen finally belonged to me. I went down the stone steps to my waiting car and didn't look back. You don't look back at a burning building once you've made it out alive. My penthouse was quiet when I got home, no fanfare, no victory music. Just the hum of Boston below and the smell of garlic and basil drifting from the kitchen. Julian stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce in an old paint-stained t-shirt, humming off-key to a jazz record. He turned, spoon in hand, and smiled like this was any other night. "Hey," he said warmly. "I made your favorite. Cheap noodles, expensive wine. Tradition." He didn't ask if I'd won. He didn't ask what I'd destroyed. He just offered me dinner. I set my purse down and crossed to him, pressing my face into his neck soap, sawdust, safety. The tension holding my spine upright for hours finally snapped. I didn't cry, but I let out a breath that felt like I'd been holding it for years. "It's done," I whispered. "He's gone." Julian wrapped his arms around me and held me steady. No gloating. No celebration. Just grounding. "We're free," he said softly. We ate on the balcony, watching the city lights blink on like fireflies. We talked about the new hotel design, where to put the rooftop pool, whether we should get a dog. We didn't talk about Edward. We didn't talk about the money. We talked about our life, the one we built brick by brick without anyone's permission. 3 months later, I stood in the corner office at the Prudential Tower. The name on the door read, Grain Ashford, CEO. The sign on the building had changed too. Ashford Financial was gone, replaced by the sleek logo of our hospitality group. My assistant knocked. "The architects are here for the renovation walkthrough." "Send them in," I said. I turned back to the window and caught my reflection, still me, but sharper, stronger. I touched the pearl earrings at my ears. They weren't new. They were my grandmother's, the only thing I'd taken from that house. A week after the dinner, my mother mailed them with a note. "She would have wanted you to have these. I didn't keep them for sentiment. I kept them as a reminder. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose to fire them." Julian walked in, rolling blueprints across my desk. He glanced up and grinned. "Ready to build something new?" I smiled back. "Always."